So Mariam Jalabi is the representative of the Syrian opposition coalition to the United Nations in New York. The SOC is made up of all major Syrian groups committed to a democratic, inclusive, and pluralistic Syria, and is recognized as a legitimate representative of the Syrian people by 120 states and organizations around the world. She's also a founding member of the Syrian women's political movement, and her work there is focused on women's inclusion in politics and decision-making. And for her work on all these fronts, Ms. Jalabi was recognized as one of the 100 most influential people in global gender policy in 2019. Htaik Seng works on media development as a digital manager for BBC Media Action in his native Myanmar. He contributes to a weekly radio and digital program called the Teacup Diaries, which reaches 5.3 million people, which is about 10% of Myanmar. That program, among others, he contributes to, seeks to bridge ethnic and religious divides in Myanmar. And previously, Htaik Seng worked on a radio show called Bright Young Stars that focused on topics important to young people, such as education, health, democracy, and true to form on a couch session with Freud, relationships. So thank you both for joining and contributing to this very important discussion. First, I'd like to ask you about your personal stories and your personal connection to democracy. You come from countries that are not known to have democratic traditions, democratic cultures. Dictatorships have defined your country for a long time, and obviously you must have grown up in that kind of environment. What does democracy mean to you? How did you come to democracy, given that you didn't have that experience yourselves growing up? Mariam, can you speak to this first?
Yes, I think democracy is, or the need for democracy, which is, as we define it in Syria, is freedom, dignity, and justice is innate in all human beings. It is something that we strive for, we want to come to. And when the Syrian people came out to the streets in 2011, it's generations who have not lived through democracy. But when they saw what's happening in the rest of the Arab world, they came out because they wanted the same freedoms that everybody else in the world wants. And this is where I come from. This is the tradition. My family actually suffered from the Assad regime for way before the revolution started. My dad was imprisoned. Many members of my families were imprisoned and tortured. We were actually forced to leave the country. So when the revolution started in Syria, there was no way, no other place for me to look except to help my people and be there and be one of the people who are asking for democracy for a country that has 23 million people and needed to have freedom and dignity like the rest of the world.
Right. And Yen?
So from when I grew up, so in our country, democracy do not mean freedom. It means J, because even we are really afraid to even mention the word democracy, because those people who mention the word democracy without even saying anything are put to jail. That's what we heard. So when I grew up, and then before I grew up in a small town, and then I went to Rangoon, a former capital city, to study. And then my dad told me not to ask too many questions, not to be involved in anything politics, and then never question authority. And then actually that's what I end up doing. I started joining the BBC. At the time that on the back of government newspaper, it was printed every day, BBC liars, IFA, VOA liar, killing people via the airwaves. So during those times, so I do listen to my father, don't question authority, do not involve in politics, don't ask too many questions. I just work for BBC, that's the only thing. And then I think for me, it's also very personal. As a person, in my country, we will call myself as kind of like mixed-blooded. I am not a pure, I'm bi-ethnic Shan and mixed blood with Chinese, so I'm not a pure blood, which means that I do not belong in any group. I do not belong in Burmese majority. I do not belong in Shan group.
Now, Shan is the large state in the east.
Yes, Shan is the largest state in the eastern part, so I do not belong anywhere. So that's why my father always told me never question authority, because we do not have a place here, because I'm not pure-blooded. So like, I'm really dissatisfied with that answer. So for me, I want the country to be a place that a person like me can exist and can participate fully at equal. That's why I'm involved in all those work.
Right. And one thing I neglected to say, I just want to remind the audience, if you have questions, please submit those questions using the app. And those watching online by using Facebook, either by commenting on the Facebook live stream or attaching a message to the Alliance of Democracy's Facebook page. And then we'll take those questions as they come. So why is it important for your countries to have democracy? Given what's going on there, why do you feel that democracy is essential? I mean, you have very divided countries, racked with conflict. I can't think of two countries in some ways that have, Myanmar is the longest running civil war in the world, 70 years, ever since independence. In Syria, you have the diversity and fighting among sects and sectarian divides. How can democracy prevail in that kind of environment? Why is it important in your countries? Okay, Mariam, do you want to?
I think I want to start by why it's important with a picture that I have here that I received from women in Idlib. Idlib is a northern province in Syria that hosts now about 3.5 million people. Half of those are people who were forcefully displaced from the rest of Syria because of the bombardment and the forceful displacement of Assad regime to the people who are asking for freedom and dignity. And I like using this picture because these are Syrian women who are carrying a sign that's written in Russian. The sign says, "Stop bombing Idlib." Stop bombing Idlib in a Russian language is a language that's meant to be sent to the international community. It's specifically being sent to Putin. It's specifically being sent to Russia. We're living in a world where people's human rights are being violated on a daily basis, and regardless of what the sovereign state that they are in, which the international community has given total impunity to whoever rules that country to do whatever they want with their citizens, it seems that this ruler has called upon his friends, which are the Russians and the Iranians and the other terrorist group, Hezbollah, to come and support him in his campaign against his own people. So when people are coming out, this picture for me, when I received it a couple of days ago from inside Syria, it made me realize, like, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, this is an action, a practical action of democracy. And I know I am coming here. I'm like, this is what I need to use, because this is practically what the people in Syria are saying, is that we are here, we are human beings, we need to be heard. We need to be heard by the rest of the world, that we are being bombed on a daily basis. As we're sitting right now here, there are bombs that are falling on Idlib that are being hit by the Russian and the Assad regime over civilians. There are children and women. There are 1 million children that are in Idlib. There are 500,000 people that have been displaced in the last month only. 500,000 people that are in the fields right now in Syria. But there is this... There's so many atrocities maybe that are happening in the world. There are other problematic areas also. But Syria, it seems to me, because I'm from there and I follow the news, it's become also, the international community has this fatigue about talking about all of these bloody children, all of these images of destroyed houses and towns and the endless violence that's happening there. And us as humans have decided that this is maybe not exactly what we want to talk about now, because we want to continue on with our lives. But this is happening now as we're sitting here. So democracy to me means that we as global citizens need to pay attention to where violations of human rights are happening in the rest of the world, such as Syria, and pay attention to it and try to resolve the problem of these conflicts. And I think we're all together in this. We're human beings that need freedom and dignity. And the life of a person in Syria should not be in any way less of a value than the life of a person here in Denmark. But somehow, or the rest of the developed world, the first world as we would call it, this is something that we need to think about and think, why is it that the sovereign state of Syria has this dictatorship that can do whatever it wants with its citizens? This is the global democracy that we're talking about? Is this where we want to be? Is this the kind of world we want to see, that it's contained in Syria, so we need no worry about it? I mean, we can talk later also about how this is not exactly contained in Syria, and we know this. But this is what, to me, means what democracy means. It's these women coming out and talking about what they need. Which is, Senator Hoyt said earlier, is that we need to have, we have the right to life, to liberty, and to pursuit of happiness. These women are asking for their right to life.
Right. I saw that Putin was on the front page of the Financial Times saying the liberal order is obsolete or such. I hope this picture gets to the front page of the Financial Times in response to him.
Yes.
In Myanmar, the divisions in Myanmar are vast, and as I said, the longest running civil war. How do you get a democracy out of that, and why is it so important?
So like Derek mentioned, we have the longest civil war in the world, I would say. Like in 1947, so like when the country was to gain independence from the British, ethnic leaders were consulted by General Aung San, who are the fathers of current state councillor Aung San Suu Kyi, to get the independence together, like flatland and ethnic city, to all get independent at one Myanmar. And then at that contract, it was promised that after independence, you will get equal right. If Burma person get like one jet of thing, other ethnic person will get one, so equality. So like, let's get independent together. After this, we all will be equal. Even I would lead this independent, I will not be more better than you. We will get one together. And then a lot of ethnic cities agree to that and then sign the Penal Agreement. And then since then, until now, the conflict is still happening. So like as we speak to, so like they are, whether we call it a fighting or civil war, because in our Myanmar political cultures, it's very important that which words we use. So they will use that this is not a war. Even we say like, if one big group have a big arm and then go and fight with another small group that have a small arm, if we don't call it war, what should we call? So like the conflict is ongoing, that including the Rohingya crisis that's happening, and then all the ethnic cities. So like in a basic term, even the government literature will say that there are 135 ethnic cities. So like for the easy sake, we would divide the country and have 8 big ethnic groups. So like the solution to that is, I would say, federal democracy. So the country transition into democracy. So now, because of the civilian and LD government, it seems that the word democracy really means a big thing. But in reality, in Myanmar, democracy is still just a word. Liberal democratic principles such as tolerance and freedom and all other things still need to be practiced or still need to be informed to the whole citizen that what it means, that if we want an equal right for all citizens that are free, so what we have to struggle and what we have to compromise to get those things. So like, well, to sum up, to stop all those conflicts, I think federal democracy is the only way that we will be able to stop all those conflicts and then honor the original promise that you all will be equal after independence. Now it being 73 years that a lot of people in Myanmar still do not get that right. Instead, what they get it, like recently, we do a small survey and small research, and then we found out that in a lot of ethnic areas, when we ask about peace, people do not know peace. Because in their life, they have been running from one fighting to another, so they didn't know peace, but they do know what is conflict. So their life have been struggling with conflict that they don't even have a sense to describe peace.
Right. I mean, they've been fighting for a voice, as you say. They want a voice, they want to say in their domestic affairs. So if you give them a voice, which is what democracy is, then you don't have to fight any longer. You have certain rights. But this is a constant struggle, I think, in these sectarian environments. I mean, the argument is from, people will say, Chinese will say, others, Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore said, well, you need a strong hand. If you have a diverse society, you need a strong hand to hold it together. We heard in the previous panel, that was the argument in Indonesia. If there wasn't a strong hand, things would fall apart. But obviously that's a false argument in these cases. But you hear people from the data we just heard that people's confidence in democracy is decreasing around the world. There's regression. I wonder how you are fighting for having more democracy. How do you view that? I mean, do you see that as discouraging? Because those who achieve the kind of transition you're looking for suddenly are disappointed or frustrated. How do you view that kind of data and that kind of attitude among transitional democracies?
Well, I think for me, or I would say for a lot of people in Myanmar, it's a pretty big disappointment that we saw the decline of kind of like democratic in other Western countries because we look up to you, especially to inform other people about what democracy could look like. We can't just say democracy is about equal right and freedom and life and liberty. We have to give them an example. Like, for example, in this country, something is the way of life is this and this. That's why it means that equality and freedom mean like this. Now, it seems that we have less good example to use to tell the story to the people. What it meant to be a free society, what it meant to enjoy democratic freedom. So we do not have a lot of example now to show. And then if we look at the world's biggest leaders, and then I think I would say it pretty disappointed for us.
So we're disappointing you out here in the West. Well,
we're
disappointing ourselves, I think.
I want to comment on that. I remember the night when Trump won the elections, and I started looking online, and we're talking to friends, and we're talking to each other. And I remember, a lot of my American friends were really, really distraught, and, it's like, oh, where is liberalism going? Where is democracy going? They weren't expecting this. But a lot of us Syrians, the way we were looking at it, it's like, well, no matter how long he stays, there will be 8 years, the longest, and he'll be gone. No matter whether he's liked or not, there are checks and balances everywhere. So maybe from when you're, I think, living the luxury of democracy, you do start looking into the nitty-gritty problems that you have in it. But in the long course for humanity, for history, this is what we're seeing it as an example where it's actually serving people to become better for themselves, for their countries, for the diversity that exists, especially in a place like Syria, with the big diverse group that we have. The only solution that we see for ourselves is a participatory democracy where everybody's voice is counted, where everybody's needs are treated equally regardless of their background or sex or religion or whatever that may be, is that everyone is equal under the law. And this is the bottom line for us. So some skirmishes here and there, some right-leaning, or left-leaning. We are asking for our lives right now in Syria. So
keep it in perspective.
Yeah, exactly. It feels like we are a long way ahead, and we have become as a global community. I think our problem now is that how do we make sure that democracy, this concept, this ideal, and I loved the talks that he gave yesterday, and from Daniel and from Andreas and from Jersey, is that we're talking about this moral obligation for us as a humanity to come to a point where people are treated equally with human dignity, with human rights, with respect for international law. We may have some step backs, but in the long course of action, I think this is where we need to go to. And this is why I think gatherings like this, coming together like this, is very important because it makes us think and question, what is it that we are not doing right, where we're still having all of these issues and conflicts in the world, where we're unable to solve it. The Syrian crisis has been going on for 8 years, and it is under the auspices of the United Nations. The whole global community has come together to find a solution for Syria, and it's a deadlock after a deadlock after a deadlock. Where do we go from here? We need to find, as an international community, a solution for how we can create a political solution that will take this country from the dictatorship that it's living right now under a family rule, a regime, a mafia that's just slaughtering its people, to a place where people, dignity and freedom and humanity and justice would be considered and put forward. To be treated equally like everybody else in the first world, the ones who are living the luxury of democracy.
Yeah, very, very eloquently stated. We have a question from the audience, so let's go to that. I like it when folks ask questions from here or far. It says, what is the role of an independent and globally connected education sector in promoting civil society and, by extension, democracy? Independent and globally connected education sector. Do you have any thoughts on education's role, maybe in Myanmar, Htaik-san?
Well, Myanmar is one of the Asian countries, so we also share what we call Asian value. So education was the most source of thing. So when you ask a daily ordinary people about what they are worried or what in their mind, so the first will be money, job or money or job, and the second will be education for their children, because they want all their children to be a better place than them. But the problem is, not all educations are independent. So there are a lot of issues in education too. So to put it in short, I think sometimes our education system do not prepare kids and young people ready for the current worldview or the current situation or the futures. Now, like AI might take over a lot of jobs, like those kind of things. So we didn't really talk about those things in Myanmar. We are still kind of like at the state of broad learning. So you have memorized all the things, you take exam, you pass exam, you go to good university, and then you do what you are being told at school. So we still do not encourage a lot of free thinking or critical thinking. Because even if you look in Myanmar, in higher education sector, in university, so now university students are more free to organize and to talk about different ideology, but it's still a lot of restrictions. So there are still lines which we do not know. So the problem is, for all those young people in university, even they want to have a much more progressive thinking and organized event, we know that there's a line, but we don't know where the line is. So it's still dangerous, and then it ends up putting young people, and like a lot of people in Myanmar, to do a lot of self-censor. We will not talk a lot. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there are a lot of questions in our mind and head, but we will not dare to ask because something bad can still happen, because we do not know where the line is drawn. Right. We know that there's a line, but we just do not know, so like we end up self-censoring. So that means, and then it also linked to media. I think a lot of people will also know the famous case of two writer journalists who wrote a story, investigative story about Rohingya crisis, and then were thrown in prison, and even later they were pardoned. And then that case sent a strong message to the whole media world that this is the example if you want to report on story that we do not like. But still, the problem is we don't know where the line is. It's never been told to us that this is you cannot write, this is you can write. So then it means that a lot of people stop critical thinking, a lot of people stop reporting on a lot of critical issues.
Right. It's not like you flick a switch and suddenly you're a democracy, you have an election. I mean, I think that was a problem where certain processes and institutions were established, but it takes longer to create the culture.
Yes.
You know, and that's why there's so much attention now on young people.
Yes.
Because the older folks, they're kind of set in their ways, they're part of the old culture, they'll play with the new institutions and processes, but they'll do it the old ways, and you'll get the old results, and people get frustrated. But if younger people, and education is really critical on this, if education is about critical thinking rather than repetition, you're told what to think, then that's more of a democratic, I guess, culture, and that takes longer. And I think people have to be more patient.
Can I put that into perspective?
Please.
There are 3 million children, Syrian children, that are not going to school, who are in the age of schooling.
Yeah.
And like you said at the beginning, is like no culture of democracy, like when we're starting with. So education, it's not just the formal education where you can write this, you can write that, what is the subjects you're doing. Education is a whole culture that we need to go through to build a society that respects knowledge and respects education, so that we don't live in a chaotic structure where we don't know where we're going next. Education is very, very fundamental to the evolution, to the creation of democracy for the future. 3 million children. Right now, there are 1 million children in Idlib, because I want to keep talking about Idlib, because they're being bombed right now. This morning, I'm looking at the news, there are 10 people who were killed. I don't know if you know the White Helmets. There were two of the White Helmets personnel that were killed this morning, and there were 3 that were killed yesterday. And every day we receive news of people that are being killed because they're going to try to save people from under the rubbles, and they get attacked and killed. So I need to keep that in perspective for you, because talking about anything, we need to talk about the rights of the basic rights of human beings in order for us to promote democracy, and that is education.
Right.
One of them is education.
Well, the other part of the population that gets most abused during conflict are women. You're the founding member of the Syrian Women's Political Movement. You show here active women saying, please stop bombing us and stop bombing Idlib. Can you talk about women's role in the Syrian movement? How are you obviously are very active, but how do you see women being a central part of this movement?
I think in order to have a true democracy, we cannot ignore half of the population. anywhere in the world. And when I'm talking about women's participation, and when we started the Syrian women's political movement, we started because we've realized that women cannot be in their typical roles of the educators, of the ones who are taking care of the sick and the elderly, and the ones who are keeping, the social fabric of society. But those problems and all of those issues need to be addressed from a new perspective, and that is that comes from policy making. If you're going to be doing policy for any future country in Syria, then we need to bring in the women in. The women are 50% of society, and they're not represented anywhere more, like 51, 52, probably in Syria now is a lot more. And I do want to say, this is not a Syrian issue. This is a global issue. Syria is just a reflection of how we live in a world that's dominated by patriarchy, by male dominance and male ways of thinking and running institutions that are built on military power and the force of the military. And in order to have a democratic structure, we need to use force, or the militarized version of force, in the service of democracy. And this is where I believe women can come in and bring in a new vision and a new version for democracy. And this is where I feel like when we're talking about Syrian women political movement, is that we Syrian women have taken on the task and carried the torch to come to the forefront and say, we Syrian women want to create policy for our country. And we want to be leading in this effort. And we are doing our part as Syrian women. We need the international community to do its part and support these Syrian women by including women in their own governments, by including women in their own bodies and their own entities. So many times it happens, I do have to say this, we're sitting in a room and people are talking about where are the Syrian women participation, in all of the Geneva talks or wherever we go. And we're sitting in front of a delegation of men on the other side. It's very ironic. Now at Security Council, and I go see Security Council, it's 15 member states. We had three women, and one of them was an appointee by Trump. Now we have 2 left in the Security Council, and we keep talking about women's inclusion. Where are the women at the Security Council? Where are the women at the UN? Where are the women who are making policy, global policy, to protect children, to protect the elderly, to actually create full participatory democracy that's equal for everyone? I think we Syrians, in spite of all we're going through, we have come forward and are taking responsibility in our hands for our own people. And we need you to come forward with us and do this with us.
Very good. We have another question from the audience for Htaik. In your opinion, what role does social media play in the ethnic conflicts in Myanmar? You work in the social media realm and the media realm. Very interested in your thoughts.
So I would say social media play a big role in religious-related conflict. In terms of ethnic-related conflict, if I can really divide the difference between. So there are more that social media play in religious conflict, especially targeting Muslim population. Of course, there are a lot of things that happened in the past. And then if we talk about ethnic conflict, social media play less role in it because a lot of ethnic people are not literate in Burmese, so you cannot read anything on social media in Burmese. And then the fact is, a lot of ethnic population are what I call them unnews. So you all might heard unbanked, right? People who do not have bank account, people who do not access any formal banking system. So in Myanmar, there are still a lot of ethnic people who we call unnews, because there are no ethnic news sources that are free, that are reaching them. So for them, as if they are living in media dark area, if they do not speak and understand majority Burma language. So I think that is also one of the critical things in our country. I think there are research papers that come up from Oxford, I think. Not only in Myanmar, it seems that in other countries too, in other developed countries too, a lot of good journalism will have a paywall. And then to really have access to good journalism, you have to be in a certain socioeconomic status, and then you need to understand those languages. So unnews is also another problem. Yes, of course, everybody knows that social media bring good thing. It also bring bad thing. We just need to fight it. Everybody knows that misinformation and disinformation is not new. The channel that they distribute to via Facebook or WhatsApp is just new. We just have to fight it. But we also need to consider the people who do not have access to good news and good journalism. I think that's also important.
I mean, on that question of technology, I saw it firsthand as ambassador there. very early on, that digital and Facebook was creating hate, creating division. What more needs to be done from your perspective? You see it day to day. I mean, these companies need to pay more attention, but you're on the ground floor. You're right at the point of it. What more do they need to be doing? What would you suggest that we do to help?
Well, I think, a good example, we would say Facebook. So in Myanmar, Facebook is the most popular. So if I want to search, like for instance, if I want to search like in this particular town, what is the most popular restaurant, I can't go on Google and search with Burmese word because it not existed in Burmese language. So I have to go on Facebook and search it. So Facebook become almost like Google and Facebook is the same thing in Myanmar. Facebook do not have official presence in Myanmar. They just recently employ more people to moderate all the content. And then a lot of civil society will say that is not enough to combat that. But as a digital person, as a person who believes in a tech solution, I think they can employ much more artificial intelligence and more resource in it to fight not only with human, but also with technology, to fight with all those technological things. Well, EU, you have GDPR, we don't. So I just, like earlier, when we heard about Nick talk about Facebook, I thought like, why don't Facebook adopt GDPR globally? Well, it's just my dream. I said like, why don't Facebook just adapt GDPR like they adapt for EU, for other countries too? Then it will solve a lot of problems easily. Well, maybe it doesn't make business sense, or maybe it's more difficult to make GDPR compatible with every existing local law. Maybe they think it's disadvantage for them if they do GDPR, for instance, in Myanmar, and if other social media platforms do not follow GDPR, maybe they are business-wide, they will be disadvantaged. Maybe a lot of things, but I hope that they kind of like adopt those kind of like a good privacy center across all their platforms, rather than just this is for EU, this is for US. Like even for election. So in the US election, so I follow a lot of things. So in the US election, you can look at a lot of candidate information on Facebook and all the things and all the ads that run, and then they will check. But it's only for rich country, not for poor country. I don't know why. Because Facebook also benefit a lot by ad money in our country. So it's not like they don't get any money that they don't want to contribute anything. They do, but why there's no willingness to do for the poor country with the standard they do for a rich country?
Right. Well, let me ask you, you're, as I say, operating in very, very difficult environments. You both are inspiring to listen to, and you're going to continue pushing forward regardless. Where do we go from here? I mean, you must hit that sense of frustration, because you'll keep pushing, keep working, but not getting the results that you hope for. Where do you find the motivation, and where do you feel is the next step? Where do you go from here, Mariam?
I listen to women like the women from Idlib. They're inside. Sometimes we, on the outside, we get frustrated. We don't see the end of the tunnel. But people inside are still asking for their freedom and for practicing their expression, for being treated like human beings. And me going back to them, it feels like, how dare I stop? How dare I not keep on going with the women, with the civilians, with the people inside who have been doing this and came out to the streets and doing this. And the way I see it is that we as a humanity, like and I want to use the example of electricity. Once electricity came through, it was the age of electricity. There was, even if there was a village somewhere in the world that did not have electricity, that did not mean we don't have electricity. We have democracy. We know what it means to have a democracy. It's a system that gives the right and the freedoms and equality to people to practice and live together in peace. I don't think the European Union, or because it's the Germans and love the French, or the French love the Brits, and like, I don't know, like all of this European Union, has come together because in the end it was proven that people coming together actually gives better results, where democracy is practiced in all of these nation states. It's the same thing that needs to happen for the Arab world, for the Middle East, for the Muslim world, where we're living, like for the third world, where we're living in ways that is not respectful of human rights, not respectful of historical lessons that we have learned. And we're going to keep the course. And if it doesn't happen with me, then it's my daughter and son's generation that's going to have to do it. We need to keep on going. This is a generational thing. It's a long course for humanity to keep on going. And I want to comment at the beginning when we said, like, it's Syria. Syria is like, when you're looking at it, we can see the ramifications of not getting involved as an international international community to find the solutions for places like Syria. Now the Europeans are suffering from it, all of the neighbors are suffering from it, and it has like really disastrous consequences for the rest of the world. We live in a global world right now where democracy has to arrive to every village, just like electricity.
Thank you. Htaik Seng.
Well, for me, so my job is to inform people so that they can also express themselves freely and they can also understand the bigger politic of what that bigger politic means in their daily life, so they can engage and participate in political sphere, whatever small they may be. So I will still keep informing people for them to be able to express themselves, for them to be able to engage with the things that matter in their life. And then out of all the bad things that's still happening in Myanmar, I would still say that there are also improvements that I see from a personal perspective. So 10 years ago, if you asked me to be here, I wouldn't dare to speak. So yes, we are not totally free to express, but there are some extent of freedom that we are start seeing. So we need to get that and then help other people to express themselves more. And the sad thing is, after the Rohingya crisis happening, I feel like we lost a lot of support from international community on the blame that civilian government do not do enough. But the question is, the civilian government do not control army, do not control police, do not control prison. So anyone who hold gun are controlled by military. And then military are nominated 25% of every parliament. So we have upper house, lower house, and we have regional parliament. In all those parliament, military kind of like take over 25%. Even the constitution say that we will be democracy. People will be able to send people who represent them to the parliament, but it's not happening like that. Then I also think it's important for international community to still keep helping us, engaging with us, because we also see the trend in ASEAN, in our neighboring country. We see that some of the things that unfold, like I feel really like this is kind of like a playbook from our country. So if you follow the news in Thailand, you might see that democracy decline in Thailand, and then the way it's happened, I feel like very similar to Myanmar, and then we can't let our people go back in the dark age. We need to keep moving to see more light, because I never want to live in a day that I can never question authority or government, which I sent them to represent me. So I need to have a right to tell them what they should do or should not do.
I think we haven't talked a lot about the Rohingya atrocities, and I think we all know how horrible that situation is, and there are horrible situations all over Myanmar, but that was a particularly horrible situation of violence and displacement and aggression. And I think many of us struggle then with why should we then invest in broader Burmese democracy or Myanmar democracy when you have this close to genocide having occurred. If not genocide, might certainly be genocide. So that is a question. I mean, these are the complexities of these countries where nothing is purely black and white, though human rights abuses are clearly black and white. They are absolute bad, but the issue of democracy gets into some very, very dicey and complex issues of rights for all, equal justice, which may not be as clear-cut in places like Myanmar as one would hope, even as we see some progress over the past few years. But there's plenty of time to talk about the Rohingya. We are out of time. It is an irony, though. I think one thing that you said, which was very interesting, about put things in perspective, it's an irony of democracy that we have more ability to complain about our situation than you would in autocracy. So you get to hear complaints and people saying, well, this isn't right, that isn't right. And I wonder if authoritarian people get together and say, well, I don't know if we're doing this right, or maybe we're not, it's regressing a little bit. There are advances. We can't understate the fact that there are challenges to democracy globally, and we have to recognize it, we have to deal with it up front. There are major challenges through technology and authoritarian regression or assertiveness. But as you say, and this is the best form of government. It provides hope, provides opportunity, it provides a voice. It's never perfect, and it's always a work in progress.
Yes.
So we wish the Syrian people and your work nothing but the best, and I'm glad you showed us all what the women of Syria are saying about what's happening in Idlib. And of course, part of my heart is always going to be in Myanmar, despite what has gone on the last several years, which has broken my heart. But I am an admirer of what you all do and the persistence in which you do it. So thank you very much for sharing it with everybody, and please join me in thanking them.
Thank you. Thank you.